I used to believe that respect was something I could never lose. I was a literature professor at a small university. I had my books, my students, and my quiet apartment in the city. I was 42 years old, and I liked to think my life was under control. My name is Anna, and this is the story of how I lost everything because of one mistake. It began in a simple way. I was teaching a course about poetry and identity. One of my students, a young man named Mark, often stayed after class to ask questions. He was kind, bright, and full of ideas. He reminded me of myself many years ago, when I first discovered the power of words. At first, our talks were about books, but soon they became more personal. He told me about his life, his fears, and his dreams. I listened, and I felt moved by his trust. I had been divorced for 5 years. My marriage had ended quietly, without anger, but also without warmth. My ex-husband, Peter, had remarried quickly, and I lived alone since then. The apartment was small, but filled with books and light. Sometimes, when I came home after teaching, the silence felt heavy. That silence was part of why I made my mistake. One evening, after class, I met Mark at a cafe near the campus. It was raining, and we stayed there for hours, talking about life and art. I felt young again. When he told me that he admired me, I felt something inside me open like a window. It had been a long time since anyone looked at me that way. When he reached for my hand, I did not pull away. What followed after that changed my life forever. For a few weeks, I told myself it was love. I believed that something beautiful could grow between us, even if it was not meant to last. But the world outside our little space did not stop watching. When the university found out, everything collapsed. I still remember the meeting with the board. They spoke politely, but their eyes were full of judgment. They told me I had broken the rules and that I must resign or face an investigation. I tried to explain that it was mutual, that I cared for him, but it did not matter. The scandal spread quickly. Students whispered in the halls. Some people said I had used my position to take advantage of him. Others said I had lost my mind. I left the university quietly. There was no farewell party, no kind words. I packed my books into boxes and carried them down to my car. The security guard did not even look at me. When I left, I had taught there for 15 years, and in 1 month, I was forgotten. The days after were slow and painful. I stopped answering phone calls. Some colleagues tried to contact me, but I could not speak to them. I felt too ashamed. The newspapers wrote short stories about the scandal, but soon they moved on to other news. I was alone with my name ruined. My daughter Lucy called from the countryside where she lived on a small farm. She said I could come and stay with her for a while. I had not seen her much in the last few years. She was 30, independent, and strong. I agreed because I had nowhere else to go. I sold my apartment and drove 5 hours to her farm. Her place was small and quiet. There were chickens, a few dogs, and open fields. Lucy lived simply. She worked with her hands and sold vegetables at the local market. I admired her for building her own life, far from the noise of the city. At first, being there felt peaceful. I helped her with the animals and learned how to make bread and cheese. For a short time, I thought I could start again, that my life could have a new meaning. I tried to forget the scandal and the shame. I wanted to become someone who did not depend on books or reputation to feel alive. But shame has a way of following you. Even in the quiet countryside, it found me. Some neighbors knew about my past. I could see it in their eyes when they spoke to me. They were polite but distant. I heard their voices sometimes when I walked away. The woman who slept with her student. The professor who lost everything. Before we continue, I would love to know where you are listening from. Which city or country? Tell me in the comments. And if you are learning English through stories, please subscribe so you can hear more every week. One evening, while Lucy was feeding the chickens, I sat by the window and watched the sunset. It was peaceful, but I could not stop thinking about the life I had left behind. I thought about the students I had taught, the lectures I had written, and the sound of my voice in the classroom. I missed it more than I wanted to admit. I also thought about Mark. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, and if he ever thought about me. I knew that what we had was wrong, but I could not erase the memory of those weeks when I felt seen and alive. I hated myself for missing him, but part of me still did. One day, Lucy told me about a man who owned the farm next to hers. His name was Thomas. He was kind and often helped her fix things. He came by sometimes with fresh milk or bread. I liked his quiet way of speaking and his patient eyes. He knew how to listen without asking too many questions. One afternoon, he came to repair the fence that separated our farms. I offered him tea, and we sat outside for a while. He asked if I liked living in the country. I said yes, but I was not sure if I believed it. He smiled and said that peace takes time. I thought about that sentence many times after he left. A few weeks later, something terrible happened. Lucy and I were at home on a Saturday afternoon when 3 men came to the farm. They said their car had broken down and asked to use the phone. Lucy let them in. I went to the kitchen to prepare tea, but then I heard shouting. One of the men pushed Lucy. I ran to help her, but they were stronger. They locked me in. The bathroom. I banged on the door and screamed, but no one came. When they left, everything was silent. When I came out, Lucy was sitting on the floor. Her face was pale and she was shaking. I understood without asking what had happened. She told me not to call the police. She said it would only make things worse. I could not understand her, but I saw something in her eyes that stopped me from arguing. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by the window again, watching the fields. The world outside was dark, and inside me, there was only guilt and fear. I thought about my mistake, about the pain I had caused myself, and now the pain that had come to my daughter's life. It felt like everything I touched turned to dust. The next morning, Lucy went to the fields as if nothing had happened. She worked silently, her hands steady. I wanted to speak, but she said there was nothing to say. She had decided to stay. I wanted to leave, but I could not leave her alone. In the days that followed, I began to see that disgrace was not only about what people said or thought. It was something deeper. It was about losing the idea of who you are and what you believe you deserve. I had lost my pride, my work, and now my peace. I began to understand that I could not escape it. Yet, in a strange way, life continued. The sun rose every morning. The animals needed feeding. The earth needed care. I started to see beauty in small things again, like the way the light touched the fields, or how Lucy's dogs slept near the door. I did not know what kind of future waited for me, but I knew that I had to live it, even if it was marked by shame. That was how my new life began, not in joy, but in quiet survival. Before I continue with the story, please like, subscribe, share, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your support means a lot. Now, let's continue. After the attack, time became slow and heavy. Each day felt the same. The morning sun came through the windows, but I no longer saw its beauty. I woke early and sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Lucy to come in from the fields. She worked all day and spoke very little. When I tried to talk about what happened, she told me to stop. She said she wanted to move on, but her eyes were different now. Something inside her had changed, something strong and silent. I wanted to protect her, but I did not know how. I had always lived in a world of books and ideas. On the farm, life was about the soil, the animals, and survival. I felt weak and useless. I told Lucy she should leave and start somewhere new, but she said she would stay. The farm was her life and she would not give it up. I knew she was afraid, but she refused to show it. The men who came to the house were never found. I tried to report it, but Lucy stopped me. She said the police would not help and might even make it worse. She was right. In some way, the area was poor and full of tension. People did not trust the law anymore. When I drove into town, I could feel people looking at me. Some seemed angry, others curious. I was an outsider in their eyes, a woman who did not belong there. Thomas, the neighbor, came often to help with the repairs. He fixed the door that had been broken and brought tools and food. He never asked questions, but I could tell that he knew what had happened. His silence was kind, not empty. When he looked at me, I felt both safe and ashamed. I had lost my dignity, and yet he treated me with respect. I wondered if he saw my weakness or my strength. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I thought about my life before the scandal. I remembered my students, the lectures, and the long afternoons in the library. It felt like a different world, a place that no longer existed. I had believed that intelligence could protect me, that education gave me power. But now I understood that power is fragile. It can disappear in a single moment, with one mistake or one act of cruelty. I often went for walks around the farm. The land stretched far, with fields that looked golden in the evening light. The silence there was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that makes you listen to your own thoughts. I thought about the meaning of disgrace. It was not only about what I had done, but about how the world had changed around me. I was a woman who had lost her place in it. One afternoon, I sat with Thomas outside his house. He offered me tea and told me about his life. He had been married once, but his wife had died years ago. He said he stayed because he loved the land. When I asked him if he ever felt lonely, he said everyone is lonely, but some learn to live with it. I looked at him and thought about my daughter, about how she had accepted her pain in silence. Perhaps this was what strength meant. After a few months, the seasons changed. The air grew colder and the days became shorter. Lucy seemed calmer, but she was still distant. She spent more time outside than inside. One morning, she told me she was pregnant. For a moment, I did not understand her words. Then I felt the ground move under me. I knew it was from the attack. I wanted to cry, but she stood straight and said it was her decision to keep the baby. I begged her to think again. I said it would remind her of what had happened. She said she did not care what people thought, that she wanted to make something good out of something evil. I could not argue with that. She was stronger than I had ever been. I saw in her a kind of courage that frightened me. It was not the courage to fight, but the courage to accept. Life on the farm continued. The animals needed care, and the work never stopped. I began to help more. I learned to feed the dogs, collect eggs, and clean the barn. I even started to enjoy it. My hands became rough and brown from the sun, but I did not mind. I began to understand what Lucy loved about this life. It was hard, but it was honest. Sometimes I visited the small town nearby to buy supplies. People there still looked at me with suspicion, but I no longer cared. I had learned that you cannot control what others think of you. You can only control how you live after the fall. I also began to write again, not for teaching or publishing, but for myself. I wrote in a small notebook every night. I wrote about shame, forgiveness, and change. Writing helped me see that disgrace was not the end. It was a kind of mirror that showed who I really was. One day, I received a letter from the university. It was short and formal. They said my case had been reviewed and that I could apply for a part-time position if I wanted. I held the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to return, to prove that I could still belong there. But another part of me knew I could not. I was not the same woman anymore. The city, the university, even the classroom felt like a memory I could not go back to. I tore the letter and threw it in the fire. Thomas continued to visit. He helped Lucy with the farm and sometimes brought gifts for her. I could see he cared about her. One evening after dinner, he stayed longer than usual. When Lucy went to bed, he asked me how I was feeling. I said I was learning to live again. He said that was good, and then he told me that healing does not always mean forgetting. It means finding peace with what remains. His words stayed with me for many nights. When Lucy's baby was born, everything changed again. It was a girl. She was small and quiet with dark eyes. Lucy named her Hope. When I first held her, I felt something soft break inside me. I had lost my pride, my work, my place in the world, but in that moment, I felt life again. Hope was not only Lucy's child, she was a kind of light for both of us. The farm became full of noise and movement. There was laughter again, even if it was quiet and careful. I watched Lucy care for her baby, and I saw how strong she had become. I also saw that I was changing. I was learning to live without expecting too much, to find meaning in small acts. Sometimes, when I sat outside at night, I thought about forgiveness. I wondered if I had forgiven myself. I had made choices that hurt others, but I had also learned that shame can teach you more than pride ever could. I no longer hated the woman I had been, though I did not admire her either. I saw her as part of me, a part that had to fall to make space for something new. I often watched Thomas walking across the field in the morning. He moved slowly but with purpose. He reminded me that life continues, no matter how much pain it carries. I realized that peace does not come from being innocent. It comes from learning to live with your mistakes. Months passed, and the world outside our small farm seemed far away. The news, the scandals, the judgments of others, all of it faded. I still thought about Mark sometimes, but the memory no longer hurt. It felt like a chapter in a book that had already ended. I no longer needed to read it again. One afternoon, while sitting with Lucy and the baby under the tree, I felt something like home. The fields were green again after the rain, and the air smelled of soil and grass. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my life, even with all its pain, was still mine. I had fallen, yes, but I was still standing. I did not know what the future would bring. but I no longer feared it. I was not a professor anymore, and I was not the woman I used to be. I was something else, something quieter and perhaps wiser. Maybe that was enough. The months after Lucy's baby was born were quiet, but full of small changes. The farm began to feel more alive again. I started to wake earlier each morning, and I would sit with my cup of tea watching the sunrise over the hills. The light moved slowly across the fields, and for the first time in years, I felt that time was not chasing me anymore. It was waiting for me to walk with it. Hope grew fast. She laughed easily and reached for everything around her. Lucy became softer, but also stronger in ways that surprised me. She had learned to find peace inside pain. I often thought about the day of the attack, but Lucy never spoke of it. It became part of the silence that lived between us. Still, her silence was not full of anger. It was full of a quiet acceptance, as if she had decided that life was bigger than what had happened to her. I watched her with admiration. I had once believed that strength came from knowledge and words. Now I saw that real strength was in the simple act of continuing. I tried to live like her, one day at a time, without thinking too much about what I had lost. Sometimes I walked to the nearby river. It was not far, and I liked the sound of the water against the stones. I often sat there for hours, thinking about everything that had changed in me. I no longer missed the city or the university. I missed the person I used to be, but not the life itself. I missed the version of myself that still believed everything was possible. I knew now that life does not give us what we expect. It gives us what we can survive. One afternoon, Thomas came to the house to help with the roof. He stayed for dinner, and Lucy cooked a simple meal. After we ate, he told me he was thinking of selling part of his land. He said he wanted to move closer to town because the farm work was becoming too hard for him. I felt sad at the thought of him leaving. His quiet presence had become part of our days. He was like an old tree, steady and patient. After Lucy went to bed, he stayed a little longer. We sat outside under the stars. The air was cool, and the sky was wide and clear. I thanked him for all the help he had given us. He smiled and said that helping others was the only way to stay human. Then he looked at me and said he hoped I had forgiven myself. I wanted to answer, but the words would not come. Forgiveness was still something I was learning to understand. When he left that night, I sat alone for a long time. The stars above the house were shining softly, and I thought about what he had said. I had spent so much time trying to forget the past, but maybe forgetting was not the same as forgiving. Maybe to forgive myself, I had to remember everything, but without hate. The next morning, I opened my old notebooks. They were full of notes from my teaching years. I read the words and realized that even after everything, I still loved language. I loved how words could hold pain and beauty at the same time. So I began to write again, not about myself, but about what I saw around me. I wrote about the river, the animals, and the sound of the wind through the grass. I wrote about Lucy and Hope, and how their lives were connected to the earth. Writing gave me a new rhythm. Each sentence felt like a step towards something cleaner. I started to send some of my short pieces to a small magazine that published stories about rural life. To my surprise, they accepted one. It was not a big success, but it felt like a small door opening again. For the first time in many years, I felt proud of something. Lucy read the story one evening while Hope slept in her arms. She said it was beautiful. Then she looked at me and said she was happy to see me writing again. I felt tears in my eyes because her words were simple but full of meaning. It was not about the story itself. It was about the fact that she saw me again, not as a broken person, but as her mother. Winter came early that year. The mornings were cold, and the fields were white with frost. The air was sharp, and even the animals moved more slowly. I spent most of the time indoors, helping Lucy with Hope or reading by the fire. Sometimes I thought about the people who had judged me years ago. I wondered if they still remembered my scandal. But then I realized it did not matter anymore. Their opinions had lost power over me. One afternoon, I received another letter from the city. This one came from a former student. Her name was Emma, and she had been in my last class before I left the university. She wrote to tell me that she had become a teacher too, and that she still remembered my lessons. She thanked me for inspiring her. She said she had never believed the rumors about me. She wanted me to know that I had made a difference in her life. I held that letter for a long time. It felt like a small piece of grace returning to me. I realized that even when we fall, we still leave traces of kindness behind. Maybe that is what saves us in the end, the small good things that survive after the mistakes. Lucy read the letter too and smiled. She said maybe I should teach again, but I told her I was already teaching myself how to live differently. The farm had become my classroom. Every sunrise was a lesson, and every silence was a test of patience. As time passed, Hope began to walk. She followed the chickens and tried to feed them with her tiny hands. Her laughter filled the air, and sometimes, when I watched her, I thought about how life begins again even after great pain. Lucy said she wanted Hope to grow up there, close to the earth and far from the noise of the world. I agreed. The land, with all its sadness and beauty, was part of us now. Thomas did not move away after all. He said he decided to stay because he felt at home near us. He and Lucy worked together most days, and I could see a gentle bond forming between them. It was quiet and simple, without promises, but full of care. It made me happy to see Lucy smile again, even if it was only for a moment. Sometimes I thought about my old life again, but the pain had softened. It was no longer sharp like glass. It was more like a scar that no longer hurt when touched. I had stopped wishing to go back. I understood now that the past is not something we can repair. It is something we must learn to carry with care. When spring returned, I planted a small garden near the house. I wanted flowers, not for anyone else, but for myself. I worked on it every morning, planting seeds and watching them grow. It felt like a way to thank the land for holding us through everything. Lucy helped me, and Hope played nearby. Each flower that grew felt like a quiet sign that life was still kind in its own way. One evening, as the sun went down, I sat outside with Lucy and Thomas. We watched the sky turn orange and pink. The air was warm and smelled of new grass. Lucy held Hope on her lap, and Thomas sat quietly beside her. I felt peace then, a simple and deep peace that I had not known for many years. I thought about the word disgrace and how it had followed me for so long. I realized that disgrace is not the opposite of grace. It is part of the same journey. We fall so we can learn how to rise again, slower but wiser. I had lost everything once, but now I had something more honest. I had my daughter, my granddaughter, and the small truth of ordinary days. That night, before I went to bed, I wrote in my notebook again. I wrote that forgiveness is not something that comes from others. It begins inside you, in the quiet moments when you stop running from who you are. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The moon was bright over the fields, the land was sleeping, and so was my heart. For the first time, I felt that my life was not a story of disgrace anymore. It was a story of change, of falling and standing again. It was a story about how a woman can lose everything and still find herself among the ruins. And in that still night, I knew that my life, with all its scars, was still worth living. If you liked my story, please like, comment, and share.